My father didn't hand me a hug when I came home that night. He handed me an envelope. His eyes were cold, and before I could even sit down, he slid the papers across the kitchen table. "You have 48 hours to get your things out," he said, his voice sharp and final. At first, I thought it was some cruel joke, but when I unfolded the document and saw the bold letters, "Eviction notice," my stomach dropped. I froze in place, unable to breathe, hearing only the clock ticking behind me, marking the countdown he had just set on my life. I wasn't some rebellious teenager anymore. I was 26, working, paying my share, yet here he was treating me like a stranger who had overstayed their welcome. I remember gripping the edge of the table, my knuckles white, wondering what I could possibly have done to deserve being discarded like yesterday's trash by the man who was supposed to protect me. I didn't know it yet, but this was the moment my relationship with him, and with my entire family, would change forever. Because when you're given a deadline on your own home, you learn very quickly what kind of war you're about to fight. I stood there with the papers trembling in my hands, rereading the lines as if maybe I'd misunderstood, but the words never changed. They just pressed harder into my chest the longer I stared. 48 hours. 2 days to gather not just clothes and shoes, but years of memories. The photos I'd taped to my mirror in high school, the books stacked in the corner that had carried me through lonely nights, the tiny souvenirs from trips where I thought family still meant something. My father leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like a landlord enforcing rules, not a parent watching his child unravel. He didn't ask if I had somewhere to go, he didn't care if I had money saved for rent, and he certainly didn't worry about what this would do to me emotionally. The cruelest part wasn't even the notice itself, it was the way he looked at me, detached, almost satisfied, as though finally proving a point he had been waiting years to make. And when I opened my mouth to ask why, he cut me off with a flat tone. "It's already decided. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That was when I felt something shift deep inside me, a burning resolve that whispered if he wanted me out, he was going to regret just how strong I could be once I left. I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat, so instead I stood silently in that kitchen, the fluorescent light buzzing above us, illuminating the gulf between father and daughter as wide as an ocean. This was the same man who once knelt beside my bed when I was 7, telling me monsters weren't real, promising I was safe as long as he was around. And now, with a single piece of paper, he had become the monster. I thought back to every holiday where I had set the table while he praised my brother for showing up 10 minutes late, every time I had been the one to drive him to his appointments when no one else would bother, every quiet sacrifice I made because I thought it would earn me love. But none of it mattered now, not against his obsession with control and his twisted favoritism. He never wanted a daughter who stood on her own. He wanted an obedient servant, a built-in caretaker, someone who would never question his authority. The eviction wasn't about space or money. It was about power. He wanted to break me, to remind me that no matter how old I got, I would never be more than a pawn in his game. But as the clock ticked that night, I started seeing things more clearly than ever before. This wasn't just about me packing boxes. This was about exposing the truth of who he really was and finding the strength to walk away for good. The more I replayed his words in my head, the more the hurt hardened into determination. I wasn't going to let him write the ending to my story. Not this time. The first night after he served me those papers, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my room surrounded by the quiet hum of the house, the same walls that had once held my childhood laughter now closing in on me like a prison. Every creak in the floorboards, every sigh of the wind outside felt heavier, like the house itself knew I was on borrowed time. My mind raced through decades of moments, birthdays where I blew out candles, but he never bothered to ask what I wished for. The nights I cried myself to sleep when my mother left, and he told me to get over it. The constant way he compared me to my brother, as if my worth was always half. I realized then this wasn't a sudden decision. This was a culmination. My father had been pushing me toward the edge for years, and now he had finally shoved me off. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the logistics. Where would I go? How would I move all my things in 2 days? I had no savings for a deposit, no backup plan, because who expects their own parent to turn them out like a stranger? At 3 a.m., I sat up in bed, staring at the half-packed suitcase I'd pulled from my closet. It wasn't enough to hold everything, not even close, but it felt symbolic. A reminder that my life here was over whether I was ready or not. That's when I remembered the small folder I had hidden under my mattress, filled with receipts, bank statements, and proof of every favor I had done for my father over the years, from paying his overdue bills to covering repairs when he conveniently forgot his wallet. He had treated me like disposable family, but I knew things about him, things that could turn his perfect image upside down if they ever saw the light of day. I touched that folder with trembling fingers, and a thought hit me so hard, I whispered it out loud in the dark. He thinks he's evicting me, but he's the one about to lose everything. That was the first time I smiled since he handed me those papers, and it wasn't a soft smile. It was sharp, a promise to myself that I would not leave quietly. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen with swollen eyes from a night of no sleep, but I carried myself differently, straighter, quieter, like someone who had already decided the battle wasn't going to be fought with tears, but with proof. My father sat at the table sipping his coffee, rustling the newspaper as if nothing had changed, as if he hadn't detonated a bomb in my life less than 12 hours ago. He didn't even glance up at me, and that indifference stung worse than anger. It confirmed what I had always known deep down. His love was conditional, and I had failed the test. "You should start packing," he muttered without looking. His tone clipped like he was talking to a tenant behind on rent. I wanted to throw the eviction papers in his face and scream, but instead, I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture of the notice, and filed it away. Every piece of this ordeal was going to be documented, every cruel word, every cold action, because one day soon I would need the world to see who he really was. I remembered the times I had bailed him out, when he maxed out his credit card and I used my student loan refund to cover the bills, when he told me if I didn't pay his overdue taxes, we could lose the house. And yet, here he was, pretending like the house was his alone, like I had never carried the weight of his irresponsibility on my shoulders. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands steady now, and said calmly, 48 hours, right? I'll make sure it counts. He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the faintest flicker of unease in his eyes. He didn't know what I meant, but he felt the shift. And I wanted him to feel it, because in 2 days, the balance of power was going to tip. Not in his favor, but in mine. I started moving through the house deliberately, touching the objects that carried my history, the framed diploma I'd worked night shifts to earn, the photographs from family gatherings where I was always on the sidelines while my brother sat in the center, the drawers full of bills I'd covered when my father couldn't manage his own life. I stacked my belongings into boxes one by one, but with each piece I packed, I also cataloged another memory of his neglect, another debt he owed me, another moment where I had been the parent instead of the child. By midday, I'd already called a friend to help me store my things temporarily, and I had also called a lawyer, someone I once helped when she was just starting her practice and owed me a favor. When I explained the eviction notice and my history of financial contributions to the house, her tone sharpened. "He's not the only one with rights here. You've been paying like a tenant, and tenants have protections." It was like oxygen filling my lungs. My father thought he was pushing me out with nothing, but the truth was, every receipt and every bank statement I had saved was about to become my weapon. That night, I sat up at the dining table with my laptop and printer, laying out every piece of evidence in neat, damning stacks. Electricity bills in my name, property tax payments I had covered, even the bank transfers where he had written loan in the memo line. If he wanted this to be about ownership, then I would show him exactly how much I owned. When he walked in and saw the spread of documents, his face darkened, and for the first time since handing me those papers, he didn't look smug. He looked nervous, and that nervousness was the first small victory I tasted, a warning of the reckoning still to come. By the second night, the house no longer felt like home, but like a battlefield where every corner held ammunition. I barely slept, hunched over my laptop drafting a timeline of payments, transfers, and responsibilities I had carried on my back for years. I remembered the exact month he had borrowed $5,000 from my savings under the promise of paying me back once his business deal closed. That deal never closed and the money never returned, but the transfer still lived in my records. I remembered how he bragged to relatives at Thanksgiving that he had single-handedly saved the house from foreclosure while I sat silently across the table knowing it was my check that had covered the mortgage. All those lies he spun to protect his pride were about to collapse under the weight of receipts. The lawyer called me again that morning, her voice brisk. "Don't leave quietly. File an injunction." If you've been paying as much as you say, the court will at least delay the eviction. And if he's been presenting the property as solely his while benefiting from your payments, that opens another door. I hung up with trembling hands, adrenaline surging. For the first time in my life, I had leverage over him. Not just emotional leverage, but legal. When I came downstairs, suitcase half zipped, I found him standing in the hallway, arms crossed, expecting to see defeat written all over me. Instead, I handed him a neatly stapled packet, copies of the documents I had prepared. "You might want to look through these before you celebrate," I said evenly. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicked over the pages, and the color drained from his face. For years, he had believed I was powerless because I loved him too much to fight back. But love was no longer my weakness. It had been burned out of me, replaced by something sharper. He wanted me gone in 48 hours. But now he understood. In 48 hours, it wouldn't be me losing everything. It would be him. The morning of the deadline, I woke up before dawn. The house still and quiet, but the tension thick enough to choke on. My boxes were stacked neatly by the door, a silent show that I wasn't clinging or begging, but preparing for something much larger than just moving out. My father avoided me, lingering in his study with the door half shut, pretending to read while I could see his hand fidgeting on the desk. He had seen enough of those documents to know the truth. I wasn't a helpless daughter anymore. I was a liability, someone who could expose just how much of his empire was built on my silent contributions. At noon, the lawyer met me outside, her briefcase in hand, and together we walked into the kitchen where my father sat stiffly at the table. She spoke with a cool authority I had never managed to muster around him. "This eviction notice is invalid. My client has been a financial contributor to this property for years, with proof of payments covering utilities, mortgage installments, and taxes. If you wish to pursue removal, we'll be filing a tenant rights case and a reimbursement claim." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's eyes darted between me and the lawyer, his mouth opening and closing without words. The power dynamic had shifted completely. He wasn't the stern patriarch dictating terms anymore. He was a man cornered by his own arrogance. And in that moment, I realized something. Whether I stayed in that house or not didn't matter. What mattered was that he could no longer erase me, no longer pretend I was insignificant. He wanted to erase my presence with eviction papers, but instead, I had carved my name into the legal and financial record of the home itself. When we walked out that afternoon, my boxes loaded into a friend's car, I didn't feel broken or discarded. I felt like someone stepping into the world with proof of my strength in hand, leaving behind a father who finally understood that his daughter was no longer under his control, and never would be again. That evening, when the car pulled away from the driveway for the last time, I didn't look back at the house. I wanted to. Part of me still yearned for the comfort of the memories tucked inside those walls, but I forced myself to face forward. My father stood on the porch, arms folded like he was victorious, but even from the road I could see the stiffness in his posture, the way his jaw clenched too tight. He knew he hadn't won, because while he held an empty house, I held the evidence, the leverage, and the freedom to decide what came next. Over the next week, I filed every motion my lawyer suggested, and each one chipped away at his carefully polished image. Letters from the court arrived in his mailbox with my name on them, demanding responses he wasn't prepared to give. Neighbors started whispering when they noticed the tension, and my brother, the golden child, called me in a fury, accusing me of tearing the family apart. But I didn't waver. I told him flatly, "Family isn't one person dictating everyone else's life. Family is mutual respect, and I'm done begging for it." He hung up on me, just like I knew he would, but the words were more for me than for him. Each day I stayed with my friend, unpacking the essentials into a smaller space. I felt lighter. My father had thought eviction would crush me, but instead it stripped away the illusion I had been clinging to, the illusion that I could ever earn his unconditional love. I stopped waiting for it. I stopped needing it. And in that clarity, I discovered something stronger than belonging: independence. The more he tried to intimidate me through silence, the more I documented, prepared, and built my case. He could pretend he still held authority, but deep down he had to know the truth. I was no longer his daughter in chains. I was the woman who could, at any moment, dismantle the reputation he valued more than anything else. Weeks passed, and the case began to gain momentum. My lawyer filed for reimbursement of the mortgage payments I had covered, attaching every transfer slip and bank statement. And suddenly my father wasn't just a man who had evicted his daughter. He was a defendant staring down financial exposure. The phone calls started then, first from him, then from relatives. Do you really want to drag this through the courts? You're embarrassing the family? Just drop it and move on. Each voice tried to guilt me back into silence, the same tactic that had worked my entire life. But I didn't bend this time. I repeated the same line every single time. He chose this war when he gave me those papers. And I meant it. What none of them realized was that I wasn't fighting for revenge alone. I was fighting for recognition, for proof that I mattered, for a line in the sand that couldn't be erased. The hearing date was set, and I'll never forget the look on my father's face when he walked into the courtroom and saw me sitting at the plaintiff's table with my lawyer, calm and ready. For once, he wasn't the authority figure. He was just another man whose arrogance had finally caught up to him. When the judge reviewed the documents, my receipts, my payments, my years of silent contributions, his expression shifted from neutral to sharp. It appears, he said, that the plaintiff has a legitimate claim to financial interest in the property. This case will proceed. My father's jaw tightened, his lips pressed white, and for the first time in my life, I saw him without his armor. He wasn't powerful. He wasn't untouchable. He was just a man who had underestimated the daughter he tried to erase. And in that moment, sitting there in the quiet hum of the courtroom, I felt something I had never felt under his roof. Victory. The weeks that followed were a blur of filings, depositions, and tense silences that spoke louder than any arguments we'd ever had. My father tried to paint me as ungrateful, insisting I'd only helped out occasionally, but every time he opened his mouth, my lawyer countered with proof, utility bills in my name, bank transfers marked loan, mortgage payments I had made while his account sat overdrawn. Piece by piece, his version of reality unraveled. Relatives who once scolded me for airing dirty laundry went quiet when they realized I had the paperwork to back up every claim. My brother stopped calling altogether, embarrassed not by me, but by the cracks spreading through the image of our perfect family. The most satisfying moment came during a hearing when the judge leaned forward and said, "Mister, this isn't a case of a tenant overstaying her welcome. This is a case of financial co-ownership. Whether you like it or not, she has rights here." My father's face went pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly I thought the wood might splinter. I sat perfectly still, my pulse steady, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't need to gloat. The silence said everything. For years, I had been the quiet daughter, the obedient one, the one who never fought back. And now I was the one sitting across from him in court, holding him accountable in a way he had never imagined possible. Walking out of that courthouse, the autumn air crisp against my skin, I finally understood that eviction notice hadn't been an ending. It had been the beginning of my freedom. My father had wanted to erase me from his life in 48 hours, but instead, he had given me the chance to rewrite the story entirely, one where I wasn't the discarded daughter, but the woman who stood her ground and won. The case stretched on for months, and with every passing week, my father looked smaller, less certain, more like a man whose authority had been chipped away one receipt at a time. He tried intimidation at first, cold glares in the courtroom, muttered insults under his breath. But when those bounced off me, he shifted to bargaining. He called late at night, offering me a settlement if I just agreed to walk away quietly. But the offers were laughable compared to what I had already proven. I told him flatly, "You should have thought about compromise before you shoved those papers into my hands." The silence on the other end of the line was thick with his disbelief. He had always assumed I'd fold, that my loyalty to family would outweigh my loyalty to myself. He was wrong. When the financial records were finally tallied, the number was staggering. Years of payments I had made, debts I had covered, interest that had accumulated. The judge's ruling was clear. Not only was the eviction invalid, but my father now owed me reimbursement that cut deep into the pride he had hidden behind for decades. Walking out of that courtroom with my lawyer at my side, I felt the weight of years lift off my shoulders. I hadn't just defended my right to exist in that house. I had proven that I wasn't disposable, that every silent sacrifice had value. My father avoided my eyes as we passed in the hallway, his shoulders slumped, his arrogance gone. For the first time, I didn't see a man I feared or a parent I longed to please. I saw someone who had underestimated me, someone who had gambled on my silence and lost. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to erase me, he had written me permanently into the story of his downfall, and that realization was more liberating than any home or inheritance could ever be. The final hearing came on a gray morning, the kind where the clouds pressed low and heavy, mirroring the weight of everything that had led us there. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my documents neatly stacked, my lawyer poised beside me, while across the aisle my father shifted uncomfortably, his suit hanging loose on him like it belonged to someone else. He had aged in these months, the stress etching lines into his face, his hands restless, his gaze darting everywhere but at me. The judge spoke with measured authority, recounting the evidence that had been laid out. Years of payments, documented loans, utilities, and taxes, all with my name tied to them. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, he concluded. Eviction notice void. Reimbursement ordered. Any future changes to the property must include the financial consent of both parties. The words rang in the air like a gavel strike, though the official one came seconds later. My father's head dropped into his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent rage, but I didn't gloat. I simply breathed, slow and steady, letting the truth settle over me. This was the closure I had never thought I'd get. When I walked out of that courthouse, reporters snapping pictures, relatives whispering in shock, I felt taller, lighter, like someone who had finally reclaimed her voice after a lifetime of being silenced. In the weeks that followed, my father tried reaching out again, not with apologies, but with half-hearted attempts to negotiate, to soften the blow of his humiliation. I ignored them all. I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't crave his acceptance. I had found something far more valuable, proof that I could stand on my own, fight for myself, and win. I moved into a small apartment, nothing fancy, but when I set down my boxes, I smiled because every inch of it was mine, untouched by his control. At night, when I made tea in my quiet kitchen, I thought back to that first moment when he had slid the eviction papers across the table, believing he was destroying me. What he had really done was light a fire I didn't know I carried. He gave me the push to stop waiting for scraps of love and start demanding respect. And while he sat in his house, sulking in the ruins of his pride, I was free. Free to live without his rules. Free to build a life on my own terms. Free to never again beg for a place where I clearly wasn't wanted. In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't the court ruling, the reimbursement, or even the public shame that followed him. The greatest revenge was me walking away, unbroken, stronger than he ever imagined, finally understanding that family doesn't get to define you. You define yourself. And that's exactly what I did.